Hello, nice to see you again. I have been reading The Borrowers by Mary Norton, and we are halfway through chapter 15, and I am going to pick up with chapter 15 and read chapter 16 today. And here I go. And Hamley woke up. She saw the room again and the oil lamp flickering, but something she knew at once was different. There was a strange draft, and her mouth felt dry and full of grit. Then she looked up at the ceiling. "Pod!" she shrieked, clutching his shoulder. Pod rolled over and sat up. They both stared at the ceiling. The whole surface was on a steep slant, and one side of it had come right away from the wall, and this is what had caused the draft. And down into the room, to within an inch of the foot of the bed, protruded a curious object. A huge bar of gray steel and a flat and shiny edge. "It's a screwdriver," said Pod. They stared at it, fascinated, unable to move, and for a moment all was still. Then slowly the huge object swayed upwards until the sharp edge lay against the ceiling, and Homily heard a scrape on the floor above and a sudden human gasp. "Oh, my knees!" cried Homily. "Oh, my feeling!" As with a splintering wrench, the whole roof flew off and fell down with a clatter somewhere out of sight. Homily screamed then, "Ah!" But this time it was a real scream, loud and shrill and hearty. She seemed almost to settle down in her scream, while her eyes stared up, half interested, into the empty lighted space. There was another ceiling, she realized, way up above them, higher it seemed than the sky. A ham hung from it, and 2 strings of onions. Arietti appeared in the doorway, scared and trembling, clutching her nightgown, and Pod slapped Homily's back. "Have done," he said. "That's enough." And Homily suddenly was quiet. A great face appeared between them, and at that distant height it wavered above them, smiling and terrible. There was a silence, and Homily sat bolt upright, her mouth open. "Is that your mother?" asked a surprised voice after a moment, and Arietti from the doorway whispered, "Yes." It was the boy. Pod got out of bed and stood beside it, shivering in his nightshirt. "Come on," he said to Homily. "You can't stay there." But Homily could. She had her old nightdress on with the patch in the back, and nothing was going to move her. A slow anger was rising up in Homily. She had been caught in her hair curlers. Pod had raised his hand to her, and she remembered that in the general turmoil, and for once in her life she had left the supper washing up for morning. And there it would be on the kitchen table for all the world to see. She glared at the boy. He was only a child after all. "Put it back," she said. "Put it back at once." Her eyes flashed, and her curlers seemed to quiver. He knelt down then, but Homily did not flinch as the great face came slowly closer. She saw his upper lip, pink and full, like an enormous exaggeration of Arietti's, and she saw it wobble slightly. But I've got something for you," he said. Homily's expression did not change, and Arietti called out from her place in the doorway, "What is it?" The boy reached behind him, and very gingerly, careful to keep it upright, he held a wooden object above his heads. "It's this," he said, and very carefully, his tongue out and breathing heavily, he lowered the object slowly into the hole. It was a doll's dresser, complete with plates. It had 2 drawers in it and a cupboard below. He adjusted its position at the foot of Homily's bed, and Arietti ran around to see better. "Oh," she said ecstatically. "Mother, look!" Homily threw the dresser a glance. It was dark oak, and the plates were hand-painted, and she looked quickly away again. "Yes," she said coldly, "it's very nice." There was a short silence which no one knew how to break. "The cupboard really opens," said the boy at last, and the great hand came down all amongst them, smelling of bath soap. Arietti flattened herself against the wall, and Pod exclaimed nervously, Now then." "Yes," Homily agreed after a moment. "I see it does." Pod drew a long breath, a sigh of relief as the hand went back. "Here, Homily," he said placently. "You've always wanted something like that." "Yes," said Homily. She sat bolt upright, her hands clasped in her lap. "Thank you very much. And now," she went on coldly, "will you please put back on the roof?" "Wait a minute," pleaded the boy, and he reached behind him. Again the hand came down, and there beside the dresser, where there was barely room for it, was a very small doll's chair. It was a Victorian chair, upholstered in red velvet. "Oh!" Arietti exclaimed again, and Pod said shyly, "Just about fit me, that would." "Try it," begged the boy, and Pod threw him in a nervous glance. "Go on," said Arietti, and Pod sat down in his nightshirt, his bare feet showing. That's nice, he said after a moment. It would go by the fire in the sitting room, cried Arrietty. It would look lovely on red blotting paper. Let's try it, said the boy, and the hand came down again. Pod sprang up just in time to steady the dresser as the red velvet chair was whisked away his head and placed presumably in the next room but one. Arrietty ran out of the door and along the passage to see. Oh, she called out to her parents, come and see, it's lovely. But Homily and Pod did not move. The boy was leaning over them, breathing hard, and they could see the middle buttons of his nightshirt. He seemed to be examining the farther room. What do you keep in that mustard pot? He asked. Coal, said Arrietty's voice, and I helped to borrow this new carpet. Here's the watch I told you about and the pictures. I could get you some better stamps than those, the boy said. I have some Jubilee ones with the Taj Mahal. Look, cried Arrietty's voice again, and Pod took Homily's hand. Those are my books. Homily clutched Pod as the great hand came down once more in the direction of Arrietty. Quiet, he whispered. Sit still. The boy, it seemed, was touching the books. What are they called? He asked, and Arrietty reeled off the names. Pod, whispered Homily. I'm going to scream. No, whispered Pod, you mustn't, not again. I feel it coming on, said Homily. Pod looked worried. Hold your breath, he said, and count 10. The boy was saying to Arrietty, why couldn't you read me those? Well, I could, said Arrietty, but I'd rather read something new. But you never come, complained the boy. I know, said Arrietty, but I will. Pod, whispered Homily. Did you hear that? Did you hear what she said? Yes, Pod whispered. Keep quiet. Do you want to see the storerooms? Arrietty suggested next, and Homily clasped a hand to her mouth as though to stifle a cry. Pod looked up at the boy. Hey, he called, trying to attract his attention. The boy looked down. Put the roof back now, Pod begged him, trying to sound matter-of-fact and reasonable. We're getting cold. All right, agreed the boy, but he seemed to hesitate. He reached across them for the piece of board which formed their roof. Shall I nail you down? He asked, and they saw him pick up the hammer. It swayed above them, very dangerous looking. Of course nail us down, said Pod irritably. I mean, said the boy, I've got some more things upstairs. Pod looked up uncertain, and Homily nudged him. Ask him, she whispered. What kind of things? What kind of things? Asked Pod. Things from an old doll's house there is at the top shelf of the cupboard by the fireplace in the schoolroom. I've never seen no doll's house, said Pod. Well, it's in the cupboard, said the boy, right up by the ceiling. You can't see it. You've got to climb on the lower shelves to get to it. What sort of things are in the doll's house? Asked Arrietty from the sitting room. Oh, everything, the boy told her. Carpets and rugs and beds with mattresses, and there's a bird in a cage. Not a real one, of course. And cooking pans and tables, and 5 gilt chairs, and a pot with a palm in it, a dish of plaster tarts, an imitation leg of mutton. Homily leaned across to Pod. Tell him to nail us down lightly, she whispered. Pod stared at her, and she nodded vigorously, clasping her hands. Pod turned to the boy. All right, he said, you nail us down, but lightly, if you see what I mean. Just a tap or two here or there. And I have a picture of this. And you can see the boy peeking down at the family as he's surprising them and giving them some goodies. And now I'm going to begin chapter 16. Then began a curious phase in their lives, borrowing beyond all dreams of borrowing, a golden age. Every night the floor was opened and treasures would appear. A real carpet for the sitting room, a tiny cold scuttle, a stiff little sofa with damask cushions, a double bed with a round bolster, a single ditto with a striped mattress, framed pictures instead of stamps, a kitchen stove which didn't work but looked lovely in the kitchen. There were oval tables and square tables and a little desk with one drawer. There were 2 maple wardrobes, one with a looking glass and a bureau with curved legs. Homily grew not only accustomed to the roof coming off, but even went so far as to suggest to Pod that he put a board on hinges. It's just the hammering I don't care for, she explained. It brings down the dirt. When the boy brought them a grand piano, Homily begged Pod to build a drawing room next to the sitting room, she said, and we could move the storerooms farther down. Then we could have those gilt chairs he talks about and the palm in the pot. Pod, however, was a little tired of furniture removing. He was looking forward to the quiet evenings we could doze at last beside the fire in his new red velvet chair. No sooner had he put a chest of drawers in one place when Homily, coming in out the door to get the effect, made him try it somewhere else. And every evening at about his usual bedtime, the roof would fly up and more stuff would arrive. But Homily was tireless, bright-eyed and pink-cheeked, and after a long day's pushing and pulling, she would leave nothing until morning. "Let's just try it," she would beg, lifting up one end of the large doll sideboard, so that Pod would have to lift the other. "It won't take but a minute." But, as Pod well knew, in actual fact, it would be several hours before, disheveled and aching, they finally dropped into bed. Even then, Homily would sometimes hop out to have one last look. In the meantime, in payment for these riches, Arrietty would read to the boy every afternoon in the long grass beyond the cherry tree. He would lie on his back, and she would stand beside his shoulder and tell him when to turn the page. They were very happy days to look back on afterwards, with the blue sky beyond the cherry boughs and the grasses softly stirring, and the boy's great ear listening beside her. She grew to know that ear quite well, with its curves and shadows and sunlit pinks and golds. Sometimes, as she grew bolder, she would lean against his shoulder. He was very still while she read to him, and always grateful. What worlds they would explore together, strange worlds to Arrietty. She learned a lot, and some of the things she learned were hard to accept. She was made to realize once and for all that this earth on which they were turning about in space did not revolve, as she had believed, for the sake of little people, nor for the big people either, she reminded the boy when she saw his secret smile. In the cool of the evening, Pod would come back for her, a rather weary Pod, disheveled and dusty, to take her back for tea. And at home there'd be an excited Homily and fresh delights to discover. "Shut your eyes," Homily would cry. "Now open them." And Arrietty, in a dream of joy, would see her home transformed. All kinds of surprises were there. Even one day, lace curtains at the grating looped up with pink string. The only sadness was that there was no one to see. No visitors, no casual drop-ins, no admiring cries and envious glances. What Homily would not have given for an overmantel or a harpsichord or even a rain barrel would have been better than no one at all. "You'll write to your Uncle Hendreary," Homily suggested, "and tell him. A nice long letter, mind, and don't leave anything out." Arrietty began the letter on the back of one of the discarded pieces of blotting paper, but it became, as she wrote it, just a dull list, far too long, like a sale catalog or the inventory of a house. To let, she would have to keep jumping up to count spoons or to look at the words in the dictionary, and after a while she laid it aside. There was so much else to do, so many new books to read, and so much now that she could talk of with the boy. And if you look right here, we have a picture of all this poor Pod moving all the furniture in the house. And they're getting all fancy. And that's the end of today's reading. So I will see everyone tomorrow for chapter 17. Please have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you very soon. Bye.